Hello, everyone. My name is Bill Lubick. I'm with Rutgers Cooperative Extension of Middlesex County. And welcome to Are You Ready to Garden? Program Episode 6, a series that airs every Thursday evening at 6:30 on WebEx. Our team brings experts together from Rutgers University and the New Jersey Agricultural Experiment Station, as well as other horticultural experts throughout the state and local farmers willing to share their expertise with our listeners. I am the agricultural agent for Middlesex County and a professor at Rutgers, teach a few courses there in ag production. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, which we're very pleased to have, Patricia Evans. Pat was our Master Garden Coordinator for many years, and she just has a wealth of knowledge. She's the owner of Country Bird and Garden. She graduated in our Master Gardener program back in 2005. And she initially installed 3 beehives out at our Davidson Mill Pond Park back in 2006, and she got hooked. She started expanding her apiaries, and now she manages over 60 beehives and produces raw honey. She's an active volunteer. She has over 2,500 hours of service with the Master Gardener program. She's also the past treasurer and past president of the Central Jersey Beekeepers Association. She conducts annual workshops for Rutgers Cooperative Extension and lectures throughout Middlesex County to both adults and children. She graduated with a BA at Rutgers University and an MBA at Monmouth University. And we're very, very pleased to have Pat with us today sharing her expertise. Pat?
Oh, thank you. So let's see, today's topic is beekeeping for gardeners. And first, I'm going to talk about actual beekeeping. And after that, I'll talk about individual plants that gardeners should be interested in if they want to support pollinators, including honeybees. So let's see here. Oh, it worked. That's great. So this is a cross-section of an actual beehive, of what a beehive would look like. And if you start at the bottom, that's a stand. Most people just use cinder blocks because wood rots. But the original layout was for a wooden stand like that. Then there's a bottom board. That's the floor of the beehive. And it's right here at the entrance of this bottom board that the bees go in and out. A lot of people ask me, how do the bees get out? So I'll tell, that's how. And then these 2 hive boxes next are called deeps, and those 2 hive bodies are basically where the bees live. And you'll see that inside these 2 hive bodies, there are frames hanging like Pendaflex folders. And those are wax frames, and the bees will put honey in there. The queen will lay eggs in there. They'll raise larvae. Eventually they hatch into bees, and that's what goes on in these bottom 2 boxes. This next thing is a queen excluder. It's optional. It prevents the queen from going any higher than those 2 deeps. I don't use them, but some people do. And then we have, these are honey supers. Today, most people use medium-sized boxes for honey supers. If you used a deep for your honey super, it could weigh up to 170 pounds. It would just be very difficult to get off. These are heavy enough, and they're only about, 4 inches shorter or so, if that. Then as we move up toward the top, there's an inner cover. That's like the inside ceiling of the beehive, and it provides a little bit of ventilation. And then at very topmost, we have the outer cover or telescoping cover, and that is the roof of the beehive. Okay, so that's pretty basic. And this is just a pretty picture of one of my apiaries. These are, I paint all my boxes red, white, and blue, but I use pastel colors, so it comes out pink, blue, and white. Recently, I had 4 hives stolen. Which is getting more and more common. It started in California, and now it's spread to this area. So I bought a branding iron, and a lot of my hives now are under video surveillance. But if you see any pink, white, and blue hives around, let me know. Okay, this is a nuke or nucleus. When you're starting out beekeeping, of course, you have to get your first bunch of bees from someplace, and you buy them. So a nuke consists, as you can see, the darker color frames. This is a top view of a hive body. This top view, the dark ones are what you bought, and those are 5 hanging frames of bees. They cost, if you buy a nuke, it includes a queen, a mated queen, who's already, most cases, been introduced into the hive, so she's been accepted. And I'd say these days this will cost you $200, a little less, a little more. Now, a slightly less expensive way of starting your beehive is you can buy package bees. It's a little more work because the other picture, you just take the frames out of what you bought and you put them in your beehive and all is done. Now these package bees, you can see they're all clustered in a big ball there in the center, and in the center of that ball is a queen, and she's in a cage. So what you have to do to introduce these bees into the beehive that you have set up is you open up the top. You wear protective clothing for this, by the way, because you're going to open this from the top. The bees have been cooped up in there for their ride from California or Georgia or New York or wherever they came from, and they're very anxious to get out. And you take that and you bang that into your empty beehive. There's a lot of bees flying around, but they'll go where the queen is. So you take the queen out of there. She's in a cage. You put her in your beehive, and the bees will gravitate towards her. They will go in that hive. This is a close-up of larvae in one of those hanging pendaflex folder type frames. This is these little white things that look almost like grubs. Those are bee larvae. So the queen lays an egg, eventually it becomes larva, and then we'll show other pictures of after the larval state what it looks like. There are 3 castes of honeybees. There's the drone, that's the male, the queen, usually only 1 queen per hive. Sometimes there's a mother-daughter pair in a hive in the spring, but that's not all that common. And then there are the worker bees or the females. The worker bees comprise most of the hive. Say there's 50,000 bees in a hive, most of them are going to be worker bees. Okay, here's a picture of a queen and what she does. The queen is in the center. She does not come with the pink dot on her head. A lot of times when you buy a queen, they'll be marked, and the color of the dot indicates the year that the queen was hatched or mated. Same thing, really. Not, well, same timing anyway. So she's an egg for 3 days. Then she becomes a larva for the next 12, and then a pupa from day 13 to 16. She lives 2+ years, and her function in that hive is to lay eggs. She really doesn't have many other critical functions. She's weighted on hand and foot, and that's why I want to grow up to be a queen bee.
The question is, how do you get the queen to stay in the hive?
Okay. Well, when you buy your bees, she can fly, because even though she's mated, she's still lightweight, and she could take off on you. So there is a candy plug in either end of the cage that the queen bee is captive in the center of the hive there. The worker bees will eat through the candy plug, and the queen will be eating through the candy plug from her end. And after about 3 days, give or take, the queen will be released into the hive. Now, those 3 days are critical. You can't just take a queen and put her in the hive and there you go, because the bees will kill her. It takes them 3 days, again, more or less, for them to accept the queen. So by the time they chew through that candy plug, she's accepted. Now, all her bee cronies are there in the hive. She's not prone to leave, because in that hive, you have everything that she needs. You've got the frames for her to lay eggs on. If you've been doing beekeeping more than 1 year, you probably have some frames that already the bees have built out the wax, and she's ready to lay. She's really not prone to leave unless it's swarm season, which we just got through. I don't know if swarm season is ever over, but the primary part of it was early May this year. I think most of the swarming ended last week, at least here in central Jersey. But there'll probably still be a few swarms. So she's really not prone to leave because everything she wants is in that hive. And once she starts laying eggs, she gets too big and heavy. She can't fly away. So when you first release her, she could leave, but after that, she cannot. If it's swarm season and she's going to leave with the swarm, the other bees will put her on a diet to trim her down so that she gets light enough so that she can fly in order to swarm. Okay, I'm going to move on. If I didn't answer that, let me know.
That was perfect. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Then there's the worker bee. The worker bee, like I said, that's most of the bees in the hive. The worker bee has many functions. First, she's an egg, larva, pupa. You can see the timing. Her lifespan is 42 days in the summer. In the fall, the eggs that the queen lays are special. They're fed special enzymes, and they can last through the whole winter. If these bees were not born in September and October, the hive would die in the winter. So it's important that you have a nice healthy queen in the fall so that she lays all these eggs for these special bees that are going to make it through to the spring. The worker bee has many functions, whereas the queen just lays eggs. And the drone, did I do the drone yet? Let me see. Oh, the drone. Yeah, the drone has one function. He mates with queens. Not the queen from his own hive, but the drones go up there in the bee congregation area, or they call it drone congregation area, or DCA. There's actually a name for this. And they hang out in the treetops waiting for a queen who's looking for a mate to fly by. And as soon, not from their own hive. That would be incest. They know better. So when a queen flies by, they all chase her to replicate, let's say. And only the fastest of the drones can actually mate with the queen, can catch her, because this all happens in the air while they're flying. And that sort of ensures the strongest of the species is going to mate with the queen that flies by, because the weaker bees aren't going to be able to catch her. So anyway, the point is the drone bee has one function. He mates with queens. Again, not his own queen from his own hive. So the worker bee has many functions. For the first few days, they hatch, and the girls are housekeepers. It's genetic. And then after they get a little bigger and stronger, they become undertakers, which is, some bees are going to die in the hive, though most of them die out in the field. They work themselves to death. Some will die in the hive, and the undertakers drag the bees out of the hive and throw them out that opening at the bottom of the hive. Then there's nursery bees when they get a little older. The nursery bees are 4 to 12 days old, and they take care of that larva and the eggs, making sure that it becomes healthy capped brood. And we'll see a picture of capped brood soon. Then there are the queen attendants from 7 to 12 days old, and they feed the queen, they clean the queen, They take care of every aspect of that queen's life. And then when they get stronger, there's the storing nectar worker bees. And what they do is the field bees, who are the oldest bees, they come in from the field, they have nectar. So these storing nectar bees take the nectar from the foraging bees and they store it in the hive. Then we have fanning bees. This is really quite amazing. To me it is anyway. The fanning bees will, on a hot day like this, they'll be on that front entrance at the lower part of the hive, and they fan. It's bee air conditioning. They're sucking the hot air out of the hive. Then they get bigger and stronger, day 12 to 35, and they build comb, because those hanging frames inside the hives, when you buy them, it's just a very thin sheet of wax or wax-coated plastic, and it's stamped with a hexagon pattern to give bees a start. But they have to draw that comb out. So they build wax onto that. So the hexagon gets some depth to it. And in that hole, that hexagon hole, that's where they put their honey. And that's where the queen will lay eggs. They'll also pack pollen into those hexagons, but they need to draw it out. So these comb-building bees are very important. Then there's the guarding the hive bees, and those worker bees hang out on the front porch there, and they wait for invaders like yellow jackets. And you will always, in a healthy hive, you will always see a pile of dead yellow jackets in front of the hive, because let's face it, there's 50,000 bees in there, and there's only a few yellow jackets at a time, so the bees are going to win. Doesn't stop the yellow jackets from trying, though. And then in the last days of their life, when they're biggest and strongest, they're the foraging bees. And those are the bees that you see outside on the flowers, on the clover, on your cucumber flowers. And that's the life of a worker bee. Okay, this is a typical beehive frame, and now you can see a picture of some of the things that I've been talking about. Across the top, kind of like a sunset picture, a crescent shape, that's honey packed in there that the bees have stored for food. But they've left this central part empty for the queen to lay eggs. So the queen lays eggs in there. There's quick access to food for the bees that are doing nursery duty. And inside each of these hexagon holes, the queen has laid eggs. And the eggs become larvae, which is what we looked at before. They look like tiny white pearly grubs. And when the larva is early enough, when the larva is old enough, they'll cap it. And that's what you're seeing here, these little brown caps that cover the larva. And they will hatch, and a bee, you can very often see this, the bee will chew its way out, claw its way out, and emerges as a true-to-life looking bee and goes right to work housekeeping. Then, let's see, then there's bee bread, which is pollen. I can't really see that in this picture, but it's in there. And the capped worker brood I just described, various aged larvae. I think this picture is really too small to see that, but in here, you can kind of see ones that look white and not capped. That would be larvae. They're not quite old enough for the other nursery bees to cap them. And then you really can't see these, but there are unhatched eggs. Okay, there are honeybee pests. I'll start with wax moths in the middle here. Wax moths have been around in your grandfather's time and great-grandfather's time. It's nothing new to beekeeping. A strong hive, you can see these ugly moths. They'll be hanging out on the hive in the summer months. And they try to get in, and a strong hive, of course, will kill them. But a weak hive, that is a hive where there aren't enough bees for one reason or another, they won't be able to keep the wax moths under control, and the wax moths lay eggs. It looks like grains of pepper, like somebody took a pepper shaker and shook it all over the frame, and then there's webbing, And it's disgusting, and you just take these and you throw them in the garbage because they're useless. So that's what happens when a hive gets weak. The hive beetle, the same thing. A strong hive can defend itself against hive beetles. These hive beetles, you can see they lay these same wormy-looking things, and they destroy the frame. And beekeepers can help keep hive beetles under control. There's traps like oil and red wine vinegar, and the beetles are attracted to the red wine vinegar, and they go in and then they drown in the oil, and then you just throw that away and you put another one in. That helps, but the hive still has to be strong enough to take care of itself. And now I'm going to jump to the top, the varroa mites. That's the worst. These were introduced into the United States in the mid-'80s that we know of. They came from Asia. The honeybees had no real defense against them, and they are now worldwide, except, I believe, Australia. Don't know how Australia is managing, but they do not have mites. Probably very strict policies about shipping and inspection that come into their country. And it is an island country, which helps. Still, every place else in the world you can find varroa mites. Now, the beekeeper has to help the bees kill these varroa mites, or they will kill your hive. You might get away with not treating for varroa mites for the first year, but after the first year, your hive's going to be dead. What happens is, and you can see these with the naked eye, but not in this kind of clarity, they're the size of the head of a pin. They burrow under that capped brood. They attach themselves to the developing bee. You can see these little red dots. Those are varroa mites attached. And then the bee hatches, and you can see varroa mites there attached to the bee. And they actually multiply when they're under that capped brood. And so there's more and more mites are being developed. So you need to treat the mites that are under the caps as well as the mites that are on the bees. And you usually treat for them in the fall and the spring, although beekeeping is one of those disciplines where as new information is learned, now people are starting to treat in January and February, and then again in the late summer, early fall. That way you go into honey collecting period with mite-free, or almost mite-free. Now there are honeybee diseases. Most of them are not fatal, and most of them have been around in your grandfather's time too. There's chalk brood and nosema. Sometimes these are fungal diseases, and sometimes you'll see these little chalky-looking babies on the ground in front of the beehive. So they had a fungal disease. A strong hive can recover from that. Nosema, a little tougher. They get dysentery. The bees are very clean, so they never go to the bathroom in the hive. Even in the middle of the winter, they'll wait for a sunny day with no wind. Even if it's just 35 degrees, they fly outside the hive, go to the bathroom, fly back in the hive. And if there's snow on the ground, you can see little yellow dots in the snow around the hive, because that's how far they could fly away in the freezing cold and then fly back. But if they have dysentery, they're in the hive and they're really trying to hold it, and they barely make it to the outside of the hive, and that's it. They got to go. So you'll see all this brown crud on the outside of your hive, and then you know that there's a problem. Then there's European foul brood, which is a bacterial disease, and the Europeans exported that to us. It is curable. It's not fatal disease, but we got even with those Europeans. Whoops. We exported American foul brood. And American foul brood is fatal. You can keep your bees going you could keep them alive for a while, but it's really not the right thing to do because an infected bee will fly out and go to another apiary or another hive and infect those bees, and it spreads like crazy. You can always call, if you're a beekeeper, and you can call your state apiarist, and she will come out and inspect your hive for free if you think there's something wrong, and she'll tell you what's wrong. And for new beekeepers, even experienced beekeepers, this is a wonderful service. How one person covers the state just amazes me, but they do. And I've utilized that service myself, and it's great. Anyway, American foul brood, the cure usually is set your hives on fire, including all the bees, and that's the end of them. There is no real good cure for American foul brood. Hope someday there will be one that's easy.
Pat, I have a question for that.
Yeah.
When you have some of these issues, besides destroying the bees, is there any carryover within that? How do you clean out that surface of those areas to make sure you don't have a problem again down the road?
You can, if you don't burn the actual woodenware, you can have your hives, really this is fairly recent, not real recent, you can have them irradiated, and you ship your woodenware, the hive body, not the frames, they're gone, but the boxes at least, and the bottom board, and the inner cover and the outer cover, you can have all of that irradiated, and it kills the foul brood. So at least you can reuse that. More and more people do that, but it costs money, and I'm not sure it's worth it. I think Jan did it once during Sandy, I think he had some hives that floated down the river. So I think he took them and had them irradiated to clean them up. Okay, does that answer that question?
Thanks, Pat. Jan is here. Jan, did you want to step?
Well, Pat remembers the painful experience I had after Hurricane Irene.
It was Irene.
I lost the colonies. I've never used the gamma radiation, but it's offered every year for folks. There's a company down in South Jersey.
Yeah, I've never utilized it myself. To me, it almost doesn't seem worth it. I mean, you've lost the bees, you've lost the frames, just go buy new woodenware, you know?
Yeah.
But it depends.
No, I was the state beekeeper who I learned from told me to burn my woodenware if I ever had. I'm knocking on wood now, as I've avoided that. So
yes, it's not that common for everybody who's listening. American foul brood is really not that common, and if the state apiarist finds a case in your area, they won't tell you who it is, but they'll usually let you know, there's a case in your area, so keep your eyes open. Thanks, Jan.
Sure.
So then we talk about what I call the triple threat, and I don't mean dancing, singing, and acting. This is, people talk about herbicides and insecticides and fungicides, and how do they all, we know herbicides, of course, are not good for bees, and insecticides aren't really great for bees, and fungicides, I'm starting to suspect, are the worst for bees more than any of these other things. But what we really don't know is the synergistic effect of these three things together on bees. I no longer keep bees on vegetable farms because, unless it's an organic farm, and there aren't too many of them, because a farmer, to make a living, he really needs to use herbicides, insecticides, and fungicides because nobody's going to buy his corn with worms crawling out the end, or misshapen peppers, or pumpkins that just don't look perfect for Halloween, and that's just the way we were brought up. Perhaps someday we'll be able to tolerate a little bit of imperfect vegetables. But it's very tough for a farmer, and they need to use these things. And farmers who know what they're doing will always spray. They'll let the beekeeper know, first of all, in case you want to cover your bees up. You cover them up at night so they can't get out in the daytime. But a farmer will almost always spray just as dark is approaching or in the pre-dawn light, not in full blasting daylight when the bees are out foraging, and that does help a lot. Okay, then if you're into this just for the bees themselves, that's great, but you're going to get a byproduct of honey whether you like it or not. So this is one of the frames that, wait, let me back up a little bit. When you're not treating for varroa, unless you're using an organic pesticide that lets you put your honey supers on at the same time, your honey supers to collect honey are on the hive when you're not treating with any pesticides, of course, because you want your honey to be organic and pure and not have any trace elements other than what's in our environment and we can't control anyway. You don't want any trace elements of pesticides in your honey. So you pull these frames of honey out, usually toward the end of July, and you take a hot knife or other tool. There are options, but this is the hot knife method here. And you scrape the heads, because the honey is capped by the bees for storage purposes. And it's capped when the humidity inside that honey is 14 to 18%. Then they cap it, and it's stored forever. It will not go bad once it's capped. But we want that honey, so we scrape off the wax cappings. And those wax cappings, by the way, are saved to make your religious candles and beeswax soap and all those other products out of beeswax. And after the honey's running out as you're doing this. As you can imagine, it's a messy job. And after the honey runs out, we put it in this metal centrifuge called an extractor. Now, this is a small, manually operated extractor. This one only held, I think, 4 frames at a time, and that's fine. I used that extractor for 10 years, and I had a lot more. Than I think at that time when I sold it, I was already up to 30 hives. But I have really strong muscles in my right arm from using that extractor. Now I have an electric one because I'm a wimp. But this is Marshall, one of our master gardeners. He passed away recently, and we miss him. But he was doing extracting when we did this. And so it's a big centrifuge, and the uncapped honey is in there. And it spins around like a salad spinner with the honey flying off the frame. And it flies off the frame, and then it comes out a spigot, and you put it through cheesecloth. There are other ways to do this, but this is nice and simple. And it goes into a 5-gallon pail, and you clap the lid on that 5-gallon pail, and you can store that honey for as long as you want. The idea is keep the humidity out of the honey. So that is the beekeeping portion of this presentation. And this is really superficial. Jan probably teaches one. I know I do too. I do a 2.5-hour workshop, and that gets into this a little bit more, where we go over the tools that are used and some more specifics and options. But if you're thinking of keeping bees, there's noise. Okay, if you're thinking of keeping bees yourselves, and I'm just talking 1 or 2 hives in your backyard, you want to go to a workshop, which is usually like 2.5 days. Rutgers offers a workshop. The Beekeepers Association offers workshops that are cheaper than Rutgers, but they're both equally good. And almost any state university, Cornell, Del Val, Penn State, they all offer beekeeping courses or workshops, 2.5-day workshops.
Wanted to ask you, and if Jan wants to jump in as well, what got you interested, and then, what kind of issues were you seeing right in the beginning that you wish you knew when you were a beginner, maybe, that would have helped you? Why did you get started?
Okay, what happened was I always liked insects. Probably should have been an entomologist, but, that's the way it goes. Anyway, I used to put them in my pocket and freak my mother out when she would go to do the laundry. But then when I was 14, my mother sent me to England to live with my cousins. And this is London, big city, 1965. We're walking around the streets of London. And the sky got dark. I thought it was some kind of huge flock of birds. And they were bees. And I had never seen anything like that in my life. And I said to my cousins, "Oh, my God, what's that?" And they said, "Oh, it's just a swarm. Don't worry about it. The local beekeeper will come and get them." I'm like, really? That sounds interesting. That's how I got interested. But then I had a career, and it wasn't beekeeping. So my career kept me pretty busy. And finally, I signed up for that Rutgers course, and I think I postponed it 5 times because every time I went to take it, I'd go on another business trip to some other place. And then one year I finally got to take it. That must have been 2004 or 5. And anyway, that's how that happened. So
Interesting.
Everybody's got their own story. But
Jan, how about you? Why did you get involved, Jan?
I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Ecuador, and where I met my wife, and she had been trained to help Ecuadorian farmers keep bees. So she had some books lying around that sort of piqued my interest. And then after I moved here to New Jersey for this job, I'd always wanted to own a farm, and I can't afford a farm in New Jersey, and beekeeping was my entry into supporting agriculture in New Jersey. So, and then it just became fascinated by the bees, and through the years, right now I only have about 15 colonies. I've had as many as 50 to 75. Early on, when I was young and stupid, thinking I could have a full-time job in keeping large number of hives. It's become more of a hobby in the last 4 or 5 years. That keeps me out of trouble. I think it keeps me out of trouble.
At least you try, right?
I remember.
Thank you for sharing, man. It's nice.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Tim told me that 20 hives is a part-time. Tim used to be the state apiarist. He recently retired. Anyway, Tim had told me 20 hives is a part-time job. I thought, okay, I could do a part-time job. Well, that 20 hives, when you're a beginner, is a lot of work. 20 hives is a lot of work anyway. But in my own backyard, which I started when I started the hives at the Earth Center, I have 2 hives. And you should see my vegetable garden, because I have cucumbers. I give the whole, my vegetable garden is 10 by 10. I have cucumbers. I feed the whole neighborhood with cucumbers, peppers, and tomatoes, because when you have honeybees in your own backyard, the pollination is amazing. It makes a huge difference. So as gardeners, if you can't have hives, now anybody in New Jersey, I think there is one town that you can't, but the state has determined beekeeping regulations, not local towns. This was a big to-do a few years ago, but it's done. And it's actually, the current guidelines are as reasonable as they've ever been. It's not bad. So if you have your average suburban house, as I do, on your average 1/4 acre of property, you can have 3 hives on a 1/4 acre, and a nuke or a starter hive. You could, now that's a quarter acre or less. So if you have even a smaller backyard, you can still have hives in your backyard. But there are guidelines, like they have to be 10 feet from your neighbor's fence, and that's if you have a physical barrier, like a hedgerow or a 6-foot stockade fence. If you don't, then you want to keep them further away from your neighbor's property line. And there are lots of guidelines about keeping bees in your backyard, but they're kind of reasonable. Always have a source of water for them. I have a bird bath out for mine, just so that they don't go to your neighbor's pool for their water, because bees like chlorinated water. So if you're a gardener and you're thinking of keeping bees, it's very doable. I would start with 1 or 2. And maybe you want to stay with 1 or 2 for the rest of your life. That's fine too. It's not about how many hives you have. It's about how well you take care of the hives that you do have. So there are bee plants, and this list was put together by A.I. Root. He's got a book, the ABCs and XYZ of beekeeping. It's a tome, let me tell you. If you want to kill somebody with a book by hitting them in the head, that's the book to do it with. But in his book, he has this list of plants. There's alfalfa, American holly, anise hyssop, apples, aster, basswood, BB tree, no idea what that is, bird's foot, trefoil or trefoil, black locust, blackberries, Brazilian pepper, and I can't see the bottom of my slide, but there's something down there. I hope you can see it. And what I did here was I picked out my favorites, because everything would be my favorite being a gardener, you know, but I picked anise hyssop. On farms, this is considered a weed, but there is also the, what am I trying to say, the developed version for gardeners, so the non-weed version, more of a flower. It spreads, but it's very easy to just pull out of the ground. Something I didn't mention before. So I don't have a lot of property. Like Jan, I put my bees on other people's properties. So I have some on a turkey farm, because people with a lot of property need or would like to have a tax break. And you can get that tax break by having bees on your property. So usually, anyway, it sounds so unfair, like rich people with a lot of property, look, they get all these tax breaks. The tax break isn't that big. It's like, I know a place that has 7 acres, and they get a $1,500 a year tax break. Okay, so it's more than chump change. But without these people willing to put bees on their property, where would beekeepers keep their bees? We need them, and they need us, and it's a perfect marriage as far as I'm concerned. But that is my opinion. I've heard stories about how people abuse that, and I guess you could abuse anything. But the people where I have bees, Christmas tree farm, turkey farm, they have a lot of property. It's not all under the plow. And they say, yeah, you can keep bees here, and it helps them with their farmland assessment certification. Anyway, anise hyssop, aster, they're all over the place, and they're easy to grow, and they're beautiful. Black locust, you see all over the place. I've actually seen it in Old Town, along the edge of where we keep bees at Old Town, at the Earth Center, and at the Cornelius Low House. And we keep them true to the 1800 style of beekeeping, which is very similar, but it's got the roof that's very ornate on the beehive, and it uses the old-fashioned wooden stand. This is buckwheat. Now, Donna Pemberton, who used to run the Master Gardener program, introduced me to buckwheat. Not the actor on the Little Rascals. This buckwheat is great. I buy a bag of it every year, and whenever nothing's blooming or the flowers that were blooming are, going to seed, I throw out a handful of buckwheat and I get the buckwheat blooms and the bees love it. Buckwheat is what gives your honey the dark color. Sometimes you see that really dark molasses-colored honey. Now, you'd have to have fields and fields of buckwheat to make your honey dark, but this is good sustenance for the bees. And for a gardener, when you have a bare spot, you plant some buckwheat and you get these beautiful white flowers. More bee plants continued. Canola, century plant, citrus, clovers, cotton, dandelions, eucalyptus, figwort, fireweed. And of these, I picked, are they weeds or are they flowers? Because you know that bees love clover. If you've ever walked barefoot in the park, big mistake, you'll find the bees as they sting you in the feet. They also love dandelions. Some of the first things to flower when we're coming out of winter. More bee plants. We have gallberry or gallberry, I don't know how you say it here, goldenrod, heather, knapweed, low bush blueberry. In case you're wondering, low bush blueberry are the blueberries that we grow here in New Jersey. Mangrove, maples, mesquite, and milkweed. This is a picture of goldenrod in Davidson Mill Pond Park. Those bees in Davidson Mill Pond Park have it good. Not only have they got the demonstration gardens, they have this beautiful row of goldenrod in the fall. And that gives them some good nectar and pollen going into the winter. And some people think they're allergic to goldenrod, but goldenrod is not really what you're allergic to. It's ragweed that usually grows in with the goldenrod that people are sneezing their heads off about in the fall. There are also developed versions of goldenrod, horticultural versions, not just the weed as we know it. And I bought that at one of the ag field plant sales that Rutgers held, that the Master Gardeners held a few years ago, and I have that in my backyard. It spreads viciously. I just keep it under control with a weed whacker. And sometimes I pull some up and I plant it in one of the other apiaries where I keep bees. Maples. It's not just flowers and shrubs. Trees are important for bees. I don't know if you even ever noticed a maple bloom, but it is some of the earliest nectar for bees that blooms. The maples still look bare, and you start to see they look kind of red. And if you look close, you can see these maple blooms. The bees love them, and it's a very good source of nutrition for the bees. And now we have more weeds. This is thistle. And again, is it a weed or is it just a flower? But bees love thistle, as does our state bird, goldfinch. Let's see. And here we have the butterfly plant. What am I trying to think of? What is it called? It's called milkweed. Brain dead. Jeez. Okay. Anyway, that's milkweed. And the bees love the milkweed, as well as the monarch butterflies, of course. Okay, we're into the P's of plants. Peaches, purple loosestrife, raspberries, sage, salt cedar, salt palmetto, which I'm sure we don't have around here, sourwood, soybeans, Spanish needles, sumac, and sunflowers. So again, I just picked my favorites. Purple loosestrife, unfortunately, bees love this stuff, but it is a bad invasive plant. It clogs waterways. It just takes over, and there'll be nothing but fields of purple loosestrife. As beautiful as it is, it's a terrible invasive species. The bees love it. Japanese knotweed. I swear, you go to a beekeeper's meeting and you talk about Japanese knotweed and they start to salivate. That's how much beekeepers love this horrible invasive plant. but it's a great source of nectar and pollen for bees. Raspberries, I like raspberries because they're so easy to grow. And they really tolerate a lot of shade. I'm sure they would do better in sun, but I grow them in shade in my backyard where sun is a commodity. So the raspberries do very well, and they spread, but easy to keep under control, again, with a lawnmower or a weed whacker, or you can dig some up and plant them where you keep your bees. Sage, I was thinking of the herb sage, and I wasn't thinking of salvia. But anyway, this is more of the herb look of sage, but they do get those beautiful purple flowers, just like salvia, and that's a wonderful bee plant. And sunflowers are just so beautiful. I have them in my backyard, and I don't do that anymore because the way the sun rises, my neighbors behind me get to see the sunflowers all day as the sun goes from east to west, and I see the back of the sunflowers, and then the squirrels jump on them and break them. So I gave up on sunflowers, but they are beautiful, and the bees love them. And sumac. I'm sure you've seen this weed. Although a lot of people grow it, it's out there. You can do different culinary things with these red spires, and bees love it. Okay, getting close to the end of the bee plants. We've got the tallow tree, thyme. If you want to see a lot of thyme, you go to the Earth Center in the Children's Garden, and they've built a sundial. And you are the needle on the sundial, so you stand in a certain spot, and your shadow tells you what time it is. And around the sundial, what did they plant? Thyme. I know, I thought that was very clever, but I didn't realize how much bees love thyme until they did that. So I have thyme at my house too. Tulip poplar, very common tree, and they love that. Tupelo, vetch, willows, and yellow rocket. So again, I picked out my favorites. Thyme. You can see why the bees love it. This is Tupelo. I'm sure you've heard of Tupelo honey. Well, around here, it's called the black gum tree. I don't think anybody's going to buy black gum honey. Tupelo sounds so much more mysterious, but same tree. So if you have a lot of black gums, you can raise Tupelo honey. Let's see. And it says willows. It could be any willow, but I bought a pussy willow. Again, most of the plants in my backyard came from the Master Gardener plant sale. But I bought a pussy willow. I really didn't plan for it getting 30 feet tall, but I think that's about its maximum. This thing had these fuzzy pussies on them in February, and the bees were all over them. And those early sources of pollen are, very important for the bees. So this tree is manageable. It's not going to get to be, 100 feet or 75 feet or even 50 feet. It's an ornamental, and it is beautiful. And this one's my favorite. This wasn't on AI Roots list, and I don't know why. It's called mountain mint. Now, most mints, you put them in the ground, and they spread all over your property, and you go, why didn't I put it in a container? Mountain mint isn't like that. And I first saw this at Rutgers Gardens. There were 3 of them, and there were so many bees on this shrub-like mint plant, which is a native species here, by the way. It looked like a plant of bees, not a plant of mint. I've since planted a hedgerow of the stuff along my back deck, and it's beautiful. Hint, don't plant it by your front or back door because people who are afraid of bees are going to shy away from coming in your house, or unless you want to keep people out, it could work that way too. But I love mountain mint. It grows like a shrub, and it does not spread unless you want it to. by self-seeding. It doesn't spread the way mint does by sending out runners and popping up all over the place. Okay, let's see, next. All herbs. Every herb, flower, bees love and deer hate. So if you live in a deer-infested area, I get one in my yard once in a while, mostly just eats all the hostas and the heads off my lilies, and then it leaves. But deer don't like herbs. They're probably just too pungent and fragrant. They're not going to eat your mountain mint or your thyme or your lavender. I mean, I guess they would eat anything if they got desperate. But for the most part, your herbs are safe. And of course, as a gardener, if you have a vegetable garden, they love your vegetables. Cucumbers, squash, tomatoes, peppers, melons, etc. Those bees are pollinating those flowers all the time, and you will have record number of vegetables from your vegetable garden if you have bees present, which is why farmers hire people to leave their hives on the farm while their plants are blooming, and then the beekeeper takes their hives away. I don't do that. It's too much work, but, you know. Okay, so as we're winding up here, I put the Rutgers Beginner Beekeeping workshop. It's not a whole course. It's 2.5 days long. You can register with Rutgers for that course. It's held down in Columbus in a beautiful building. The Eco Complex has a lovely conference room. It's usually 2 days of demonstration / lecture, and the third day, which is half a day, is hands-on, which is very useful. And then the Beekeepers Association is also starting to offer bee classes, so you can go on the New Jersey Beekeepers Association website and you can look for when classes are being offered.
Pat, that was great. Thank you very much. Just a few things to run by you here. Jan did a terrific job of answering a lot of questions today.
Oh, he must have been busy because there's so much unsaid, you know.
Well, yeah, but it's a fascinating topic. It really is. I mean, I don't claim to be an expert in this area. I grow vegetables and a lot of other crops, but I appreciate all the beekeepers around us that do all that hard work, because otherwise we wouldn't have a lot of our crops. Now, for people getting set up, Jan did answer it a little bit before, but getting started with a few hives, and just what are your suggestions in terms of, where do you go to get this? I know there are places online, but where would you suggest to kind of get started, and maybe just with a hive or two, and maybe some quick tips for people that want to get started slowly and work into this?
Okay. First of all, if you were going to start hives this year, you should have started them in the end of April or May. Now, I'm not saying that now is too late, but if you want to start a hive or two this year, you better hit the ground running, because you need to set up fast, because you want those new bees to be built up into at least 2 deep or 3 medium boxes before winter hits. So if you are thinking about beekeeping, start this year, start as soon as you can, or use your time to take one of these courses, order your supplies, and you get to take your time about it. Now, where would I get my supplies? I can tell you where I get my supplies. I buy a lot of stuff from Man Lake, MANNLAKE, and I need to sip the water. Hold on. If you order $100 worth of material or more, they ship for free. And trust me, every time you place an order with Man Lake, it'll be for $100 or more. This is not cheap. The way you make your money back is you harvest your honey and you sell it at events. The high school is having a Christmas fair. Vendors are coming to your church for a craft sale. You sign up for those things, sell your honey, and you can recover your costs. You may not make any money, that would be good, but at least your hobby didn't cost you anything. So I buy from Man Lake. They have an online catalog. They have a paper catalog. If you call them, they will be more than happy to send you one, believe me. I buy from Man Lake. There's a location in Pennsylvania, in Wilkes-Barre, from the Earth Center, just to give you a frame of reference. It's about a 2.5-hour drive, but it's a beautiful drive. And what they have there in Wilkes-Barre is a little supermarket, and you get your carriage and you go up and down the aisles and you pick out your beekeeping supplies. That's the best way because you get to see it instead of just buying it from a catalog. You need to talk to other beekeepers, and Jan will tell you, 10 beekeepers, 10 different opinions. So you can listen.
20 different opinions.
Yeah, okay, yeah. And here was the opinion this year and my new opinion next year. So don't buy the starter kit from these outfits like Man Lake because they sell you things that you don't need. They sell you these heavy-duty gloves that would be good for taking in firewood, but they're not really good for beekeeping. They sell you that beekeeping suit that looks like a snowsuit down to the ankles. Do you know how damn hot that is in the summer? You're not going to want to wear that. But that's what comes in the starter kits. So you probably want to pick and choose once you know the elements of what you need. I went over it really quickly here, but if you take at least a 2.5-hour workshop or a 2.5-day workshop, you'll leave there with a better understanding of what you need. And if you don't have time for that because you want to get started right away, find a beekeeper in your area.
I'd concur with Pat. And in the chat window, I typed the address of the New Jersey Beekeepers organization. Has a website. You could look up local beekeepers for local honey. You can also find the different member groups. There's a Central Jersey Beekeepers. There's one in South Jersey. There's the Northwest Beekeepers. Up in Essex County, in the northeast corner of the state, we have the Essex County Beekeepers Association. They all are welcome new members. You don't even have to have bees to join, but it would be a good way to meet other beekeepers and then find somebody who could become a mentor of yours. Practice on somebody else's bees, learn what you're doing, and then get your own. I have a couple of master gardeners up in Essex County who have done that. So there are a couple ways you can get into having your own bees.
At these association meetings, Jan and Pat, what do you typically, do you have an educational portion and then a Q&A, or how do you work your meetings?
Yes, we have a speaker who will speak on a specific topic, and then there's Q&A following that. And to join these beekeeper associations, it's $25 for the year, and they give you dinner when you're there, which is pizza or a sub sandwich and coffee and soda and water. So you get your $25 worth, that's for sure. So they usually meet 4 times a year, and it's a great way to share your sob stories and pick other people's brains for their opinions on how you should do things. And you can also sign up for a mentor. Most of the chapters, like Central Jersey, which meets in Freehold, that's the one I go to. I could go to Raritan, but I wound up going to Freehold. It's equidistant for me, and I like the Central Jersey chapter. You'll like probably whatever chapter you join, and you'll learn a lot, and you get an hour's worth of education at each meeting, and these speakers are very interesting. So besides Man Lake, there's a company in New York called Better Bees. They do not shoot for free. There may be a hair better than Mann Lake's equipment, better made. That's debatable. There's also your local beekeeping sources. There's Sally's Beehive Barn in Plainsboro/Cranberry. Sally was a shop teacher in her former life, and so she makes her own woodenware right there in the wood shop. And she raises nukes and sells queens. When I need a queen, because, okay, we just came out of swarm season, so a lot of these hives that swarmed, they take the queen with them, and the bees that are left behind in the hive, they're supposed to raise a new queen. And 75% of the time they do, but the 25% of the time that they don't, you have to run out and buy a queen and re-queen your hive. But, so there's Sally, and that's just in my area. I'm sure there are local people in your areas, too, that supply queens and bees. Okay?
Very good, Pat. We really appreciate it. In terms of, you have a couple hives in your backyard, and it sounds like some people were asking questions before. How far do these bees go to forage? And they can go anywhere from 2 miles up to, 7 miles or more to forage?
I believe it's 2 to 4, and
okay.
They're opportunists. They're not going to go more than 2 miles if what they need is there. Mm-hmm. They're not going to cruise around looking for something further away.
In terms of winter injury from cold, have you probably didn't see that last year, but I mean, has that been an issue in the past with cold temperatures?
No, there's Tim, former apiarist, used to say, bees don't die of cold, they die of mites, varroa mites.
Well, that's a good thing to know.
Yeah, a hive with a lot of bees in it, and as long as they're mite-free and disease-free, which you take care of that, they will form a cluster, and in the center of that cluster will be the queen. The bees on the outside of this cluster inside the hive rotate, so none of the bees on the outside freeze to death. And they keep the center of that cluster is 98 degrees. So they're fine in New Jersey. They're fine. I mean, if we lived in Maine or Canada, we'd be talking another story. If the temperature, if I see the long-range forecast and the temperature's going to drop down to 0 degrees for a week, I might wrap some of the hives that I consider weaker. And by wrap, I mean I just take roofing paper and I wrap it around the hives. You actually, in the winter, airflow is more important, I think, than the summer. So the top of the hive is actually cracked open a little bit to allow some of the condensation to escape. Otherwise, the bees keeping it so hot and it's really cold outside, it's like camping in a tent in the winter. The hive starts to sweat on the inside, the water falls down on the bees and kills them. So it's not really about wrapping your bees up real tight in the winter. It's more about good ventilation and having them go into the winter with a good-sized, healthy colony.
Pat, thank you so much for
Thank
sharing your expertise with us today. It's really fascinating. Every time I hear about the complexities of bees, and I really appreciate it as a part-time farmer, working with my brothers. We love having the beehives around our farm. I mean, you're absolutely right. If we didn't have those beehives, we wouldn't have the production at all, with especially our cucurbits.
Yeah.
And Jan, thank you for joining us today, because Jan was answering a lot of questions and just doing a terrific job as well. As I mentioned, next week we've got a fascinating group of speakers on vegetable breeding at Rutgers, and we're going to talk about the history of breeding. A lot of some of the best vegetables you'll see out there, including asparagus and the famous Jersey tomato and strawberries that we've got released out there. We're also going to get into food preservation, freezing and dehydrating a little bit later in the season with my colleagues from Family Consumer and Health Sciences. And we'll see you next week. And once again, I want to thank Pat for being with us today. Pat, you were a wealth of information, and thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to help us today, and Jan, you as well. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you all next week.
Thanks, Bill.
Take care.
All right, everybody. Bye-bye.
Good night.